This live stream is going to be somewhat focused on the topic of AI and surveillance, but as we tend to do in these streams, we're going to spiderweb out across a lot of different topics. And this is focused on a Q&A episode. So if you have any questions, any comments, any issues that you're dealing with, that you're struggling with, how to resist, how to fight back against the AI machine, what is meaning in this time of the poly crisis, how do we find ways to contribute to broader resistance movements in the face of all this surveillance, all these types of topics we're going to be diving into. So please feel free to think about questions, think about challenges that you're facing, and share them here. Justin is apparently still having trouble joining. Let me try to re-add him. Oh, maybe that's what I needed to do. Okay. He couldn't join until I invited him. So he should pop on now. Let's see. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. As I shared in the promo post I made about this live stream, I am going through it a little bit myself. I read the latest article from Dr. Elliot Jacobson last night. Professor Jacobson is the author of The Climate Casino on Substack. Is this coming through okay? Can folks see me and hear me? Leave a comment or something if you can, because this seems to be going slowly. Okay, I'm seeing some hearts, so folks are able to see. So yeah, as I was saying, I read Professor Jacobson's latest piece last night, which was titled "More Fucked Today Than Yesterday," and it was just a sobering piece. I mean, I've been following the climate crisis more closely than I would say almost anyone who's not a climate scientist for the past more than 20 years at this point. And I know how bad the climate crisis is. But even if you know how bad it is, it's worse than that. It's worse than you think. So that piece kept me up last night. I was tossing and turning, just thinking about what's coming in future years. And hopefully Justin will be hopping on here and we can dialogue some more about this. Charlotte, thanks for the comment there. I appreciate you letting me know that folks can see the stream. Okay, excellent. Still waiting on Justin here, so his technical issues must be continuing. So just to run down some of the topics that I would like to discuss today. Some of you may be aware, but on August 2nd, which is this coming Sunday, I've invited people who are in the local region where I live, which I live near Eugene, Oregon, folks who are in relative proximity to this area to join me for a visit to a threatened old-growth forest. This is a patch of ancient forest with trees 400 to 500 years old, which is close to Eugene. It's about 20 miles outside of town, and currently it has some protection under BLM regulations for what's called the Resource Management Plan for Western Oregon, one of the Western Oregon districts, which restricts logging of old trees on BLM lands. But those resource management plans are being revised by the Trump administration right now to maximize timber production. And they're explicitly planning to revoke those protections for old-growth forests on BLM lands. So this coming Sunday, August 2nd, myself, other biocentric readers and viewers and community members are going to go out there and gather at this old-growth forest site and spend time walking in this grove of trees, being there in person with these beings, learning about the threats to them, what the timeline looks like, and discussing options for resistance. So if folks are in Oregon, are nearby this area, then feel free to reach out to me. Check out the latest post on the Substack because it has details about how to join, how to RSVP, how to be part of that. I would like to also talk about the El Nino and what is coming in 2027, which is scary. Like I said, it kept me up last night. Welcome, folks. I see more folks are tuning in. Brooke, Phil, Charlotte, welcome. I want to talk, and then we're going to focus, like I mentioned, on surveillance, AI, and state repression. I want to talk about Trump's executive order targeting anti-capitalists, among other groups, this new focus that Marco Rubio announced recently on left-wing terrorism. We're already seeing this have effects in different arenas. You can look at the Prairie Land sentencing down in Texas and the impacts of these terrorism enhancements on people's sentences. There were some questions that folks submitted a while back for me to cover in one of these live streams. Questions about AI, questions about questions about how we got here and what comes next, questions about disintegrations of shared conceptions of reality, questions about mental illness and psychosis as separation from reality. And we had one reader, biocentric reader, who asked about nuclear power. So I'd like to dive into that because I've been doing some more writing about that topic recently, and it's on my mind at the moment quite a bit. So thanks again, folks, for joining. This is a Q&A live stream, so drop questions or comments on the chat, and I'll get to those as best I can. We're getting started a little late because of technical difficulties. Justin is having difficulty joining. I don't know what. Maybe his internet went down. But I appreciate folks being here, and I figured we better just get started since we're over time. We plan on starting at the top of the hour. So let's go through some of these questions that came in earlier. These are questions actually from a while ago that I never got to. I let folks know, leave questions and I'll answer them in my next video. This was actually last year, so apologies that it took a long time to get to these, but I do tend to get back to people even if it's slow in some cases. So here's a question that I got last year. Quote, AI energy consumption, water use, climate geolocations, trends for keystone species, and effects/threats by industry, and intelligence application for protecting oil interests and emerging extraction. That was a topic that this reader wanted me to cover. Also, how this infrastructure AI is weaponized against people or trends towards concentration through use and access, and how resistance will have to adapt and evolve to overcome. I think that's a key point that we can discuss here in a moment. The question continues. The animals, goes in a more animist direction. The animal songs along the way, the teachings of the plants, the wisdom of the water, local foods you eat, community empowerment, legal developments in current cases, emotional transmutation. The people who have been here for 500 plus years in different communities, high tech versus low tech, history of techno warfare and peacemaking for free trade, fair trade tensions. So this is kind of a broad comment and question from a reader of Biocentric that was submitted a while ago. Welcome, folks who are joining. This is a Q&A episode focused on surveillance and AI, so I'm just diving into some old questions. So AI energy consumption and water use, we know that this is happening at a very high level around the world. AI data centers use a lot of water to cool the high-powered computer chips that they use to do their calculations. If you've been following Bitcoin, for example, this is exactly the same. Here's Justin.
How's it going?
How's it going?
Good.
Good. Glad you got the technical issues figured out here.
I just went to my phone.
Yeah.
The computer wasn't working with all that stuff, so I just went to the phone.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I had to do too. So we're a little behind schedule, but we're here. We've got folks joining. I've just been diving into some questions that were submitted a while back. Um, I was talking about AI energy consumption and water use. One of the points that I want to make that I think is quite important to understand when talking about AI energy consumption and water use is that it's serious and it's a big issue. It's people are seeing aquifers getting drawn down. People are seeing their utility bills go up. People are seeing like skyrocket, to very high levels. People are seeing impacts to ecology from drawing down all this water use. But I also want to be clear that AI is just gasoline poured on a bonfire that's already burning, right? It's not like the internet was a sustainable technology and then AI came along and suddenly that's the unsustainable thing on top of the internet. The internet itself is basically the same it's made up of the same technologies that AI is. If you look at data centers that run something like iCloud or Google Drive or Gmail or YouTube or Wikipedia or any of the services that make up the core of the internet today, they consist of vast data centers running huge racks of computers which need to be cooled, which require huge amounts of electricity. Of course, all of those are very energy and material intensive to produce. If you look at what actually goes into producing computer chips, silicon chips, and so on. These are global supply chains, so we have the implication of impacts on communities all over the world, whether it's gold mining in Papua New Guinea, in West Papua, occupied West Papua, or whether it's nickel mining in Indonesia. At the other end of the supply chain, when you get to waste disposal, look at Ghana. Look at the dumping of e-waste in places like Ghana. It's an atrocity. And all this has been happening since long before AI came onto the scene. So AI is an accelerant on all these things, but it's a fundamental mistake to say that AI is the problem. This is similar to at Thacker Pass. People would learn about the harms of lithium mining because we were educating about that. And they'd say, wow, we really can't mine lithium. Let's figure out how to make these batteries using some other material. And I'd tell those people, you're fundamentally misunderstanding the problem here because lithium mining is not uniquely destructive. It's not uniquely destructive. It's mining. Mining is destructive. Mining is an incredibly destructive activity, no matter whether it's for lithium, for cobalt, for copper, gold, iron ore, bauxite for aluminum, rare earth metals, what have you. Mining is an incredibly destructive thing. And similarly, when we look at AI, all the destructive properties of AI are the same destructive properties that the internet has. We can talk about AI and how it's contributed to a rise in surveillance, in autonomous weapons and targeting and all these things. That's an accelerant on what was already happening because if you read Surveillance Valley by Yasha Levine, you'll know that the internet was a project of the surveillance state. The entire internet emerged from the U.S. government and specifically from the intelligence community and the military as a tool for warfare, surveillance, and intelligence gathering. It's a mistake to think about the internet as being this good, sustainable thing in the pre-AI time, and now it's being destroyed by AI. AI is an accelerant. And, I welcome all the people who are so pissed about AI. I'm very glad they are, but don't get it twisted. AI is not uniquely destructive, especially, compare the amount of water use for AI data centers to industrial agriculture. The AI data centers are using like almost zero comparatively. It's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent the water that they're using. And people don't like to hear that because, agriculture for many people is this sort of sacred thing that should not be questioned. But that's the reality. I mean, producing the food to feed over 8 billion people on this planet is taking so much more water from the natural world than AI data centers are. And that's, again, I'm not making an argument for data centers or trying to protect them in any way. I'm saying we have to understand proportionality. We have to understand the complexity and multifaceted, multi-layered reality of these issues. Justin, sorry, I just wanted to finish answering that question, but welcome again. Sorry,
Thanks for
I'm
having me.
still getting over this cough
Oh,
that I've been dealing with for like a month. But how are you doing today? What's up with you?
I'm doing okay. Uh, enjoying. I've been really enjoying people on Substack lately. I kind of was dropping off a little bit from it for a while, just getting burnt out. But I feel good about being back and
Mhm.
getting into some more articles. This whole thing I wrote recently about the sort of intentionality of increasing fuel prices was really a fun deep dive for me. So I'm
Tell me
feeling
about
good.
that piece because I saw that you published that yesterday, but I haven't gotten a chance to read it yet, or maybe it was the day before.
Yeah,
So
I think it
can
was
you
Saturday.
summarize? Yeah, summarize what it's about.
Yes. Yeah. The idea is that this has been done before, so I'll say that um, that when you increase the price of oil, that it harms U.S. competitors
Mhm,
and it increases the demand on the dollar because uh, if you can't buy oil from the Russians or from Iran, which is what I'm talking about, with the Strait of the Hormuz being closed, with attacks on oil infrastructure in the Middle East and in Russia, and basically embargoes on imports from Russia to Europe. To buy oil, you have to use the dollar.
mhm,
So there's a rush on the dollar, um, and so this is something that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, but that the idea that the United States government is intentionally not either like they intentionally went into the war with Iran knowing that the prices of oil would go up.
mhm,
When you cut off uh, 30% of the world's oil supply, the prices are going to go up, um, and it's been done before. In the 70s, 1973, there was a 400% increase on the
mhm,
cost of oil during the Yom Kippur War,
mhm,
um, and the United States knew that was going to happen. In fact, that was the plan, according to at least some things that I've read. And they're not going to come out and say that, of course, but there's evidence that there was a plan among particularly American and Anglo elites, and that Kissinger basically made it so that that war, where it's Syria and Egypt invade Israel, they use their diplomatic bungling to make sure that that war happens, and then they tell the Middle Eastern countries that they can go ahead and raise the oil prices.
mhm,
And this destroys the economy or at least it highly damages the economy of Germany and Japan, who are manufacturing competitors at the time, um, because they had to, again, everyone had to get the dollar to buy more oil. Japan and Germany are 100% reliant on imports of oil.
mhm,
And so this really put a stranglehold on their economies. But the United States has access to its own oil. It doesn't have to import it. And so
mhm,
it has the ability to weather the higher gas prices, which they did in the 1970s. And the result was there's this huge amount of influx of dollars in Wall Street, and bankers, and all that stuff. They make a ton of money off of all those oil profits. And then American competitors globally, including our so-called allies, suffer. I bet all of this is designed to maintain, like a financial, economic hegemony over the rest of the world, keeping the dollar as
mhm,
uh, the primary reserve currency, as
mhm,
well as the primary currency used to purchase oil. This is essential. If either of those things collapses, the United States economy would collapse horribly. And so, knowing all this, knowing that there's BRICS, other alternative currencies that are happening and people are using for loans and things like that, this latest stuff appears to be, history repeating itself, the United States continuing to try to damage the economies of competitors and maintain the dollar as the um, primary currency. One of the things that happens, like in Latin America, for example, they would have they need to get dollars to be able to buy oil, and so a lot of times they'd have to take loans. They don't have the assets to sell or whatever.
Mhm.
So here comes the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, whatever, and they make them liquidate assets to pay off their debts that they lend to them, and they allow American corporations to come in and purchase those assets. So it's just a way of maintaining control of the global economy,
Huh.
if that makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah, I know there's different takes on there on what's happening. Some people think it's just pure incompetence that people in the US government actually believe that they could take down the Iranian state so quickly. Um, and that Iran wouldn't be able to shut off Hormuz. You know, others others have argued that part of the whole strategy is destabilization, given the rise of China's power globally and other competitors with the U.S. That the
Russia.
U.S. is recognizing it no longer has sort of unilateral hegemony over the global economy, and therefore is using destabilization as a way to shake up a situation in which otherwise the U.S. was steadily losing power and hegemony globally. Um,
I think fifty
other
percent of
analysts,
China's oil come from the Middle East, for example.
yeah,
Sorry.
other analysts like Simon Dixon have argued that financial elites who are transnational individuals who don't have allegiance to any given state are actually using Trump and using the invasion of Iran or the bombing of Iran as a deliberate strategy to facilitate the end of American empire and the transition towards a multipolar world, um, as a deliberate strategy to maintain their control. Because again, you look at rising oil prices, the oil companies' profits are higher than they've ever been. You look at the stock market and the AI trade, it's higher than it's ever been. Um, and global financial elites uh, are yeah. Simon Dixon argues that essentially there are three pillars of control in most of the world today: the financial industrial complex, the military industrial complex, and the technology industrial complex, which is sort of the newest of the three. And he argues that the invasion of Iran was in some ways a bone thrown to the military industrial complex to simply make them a lot of weapons contract money. And in other ways, a testing ground for the technological industrial complex to refine weapons of war, AI targeting, drones, autonomous warfare technology, surveillance, and so on, in another large battlefield, much larger than the genocide in Gaza, for example, and in some ways represents the financial industrial complex pivoting, deliberately orchestrating a pivot away from U.S. hegemony towards towards a more multipolar world, but one in which their power remains just as complete as ever before. And he kind of likens it to the fall of the British Empire and how the dismantling of the British Empire in the wake of World War II, uh, it resulted in the impoverishment of the British nation. England is actually quite a poor country these days compared to a lot of the West. But that the financial elites, which really represented the true power of the British Empire, they kept all their wealth. They just pivoted the way in which they were conducting their economic exploitation of the world as the British Empire fell. I certainly think there's some truth to this. So it's interesting to hear all these different strategies. I think there's probably elements of truth in all of them, and there's probably other things going on that we're not aware of as well. But but fascinating to explore, especially in these times as we're all kind of dealing with the reality of it.
Yeah,
Interesting,
and
Jesse.
the
I'll look forward
reality
to reading
is,
it.
yeah, I'm gonna do a follow-up about the sort of the history of that strategy, and it could be a lot of these things could be true simultaneously because, if, as Steve Bannon has written openly cheerleaded this exact strategy that I'm talking about, uh, and it goes back to Kissinger, so maybe before, but if if you can sell someone on that strategy like Trump and his team, um, knowing that it may not work the same way as it did in the '70s, then what some of these other theories might be correct in the sense that, hmm, you know, um, like the dollar being the reserve currency of the planet requires trust. It requires a certain amount of trust.
Mm,
Otherwise, you will have other countries coming up with alternatives to it. Um,
mm,
but what they're doing in raising the oil prices makes doing that challenging, making alternatives
mm,
to the reserve currency being the dollar. It makes it a challenge because it floods the market with demand uh, f- for the dollar to be able to purchase oil because a lot of the oil that's not coming from BRICS countries. The United States controls a lot of what's left.
mhm.
Venezuela. It's interesting that they invaded Venezuela right before they did this.
Right.
Um, that's a sign to me they knew that getting a hold of as much oil as possible before that went down. They knew that it was going to go down the way it went down. And
Mm,
it's not just like they had no idea or believed that Iran would just fall immediately. I mean, maybe they thought, sure, that could happen, but not
mhm.
likely, my
Yeah.
opinion.
Well, I'll look forward to reading that. Uh, oil prices blunder or plunder, right? Is what that piece is called.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
I'll look forward to reading it here in some point in the coming days. The most recent piece that I published, I mentioned this earlier, but for folks who have joined since, on August 2nd, which is this Sunday, I'll be taking folks out to an old growth forest that's threatened with logging as a result of Trump's changing policy directives to the federal land management agencies like the Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, et cetera. They're trying to dismantle what few administrative protections did exist for old growth forest here in Western Oregon. So I'm bringing people out to visit one of these sites. It's about 20 miles outside of Eugene, Oregon, where I live here. And for folks who either live nearby or have friends and family who do, please spread the word. Check out that post on my Substack RSVP to try and come out if you can. We're going to go spend some time in this place in person, get to spend time with these 400 to 500-year-old ancient trees, see what's at stake there, talk about what's coming in terms of the logging projects, and brainstorm and strategize around resistance to protect these forests. So hopefully folks can join me on the 2nd. Karen, I see you saying you're coming. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be good to see you there. Um, So this live stream is really we talked about focusing on AI and surveillance specifically, and that gets to the second part of the question that I read earlier from a reader at Biocentric who was asking about how AI is being weaponized against people or our movements, and how resistance will have to adapt and evolve to overcome. And I want people to understand what's happening in a sense. Bruce Schneier is a public interest technologist who studies AI and all the cryptography and data encryption, security, and all these things. I've been following his work for years, and one of the ways that he's been describing what's happening with AI surveillance is that we're actually moving from a world of mass surveillance to mass spying. And there's a difference between those two things. Mass surveillance is what Edward Snowden warned us about, right? Mass surveillance is what the NSA is doing, where they're doing bulk, warrantless capture of all unencrypted and encrypted data. I mean, the encrypted stuff, they might not be able to access large chunks of it, at least, depending on how good the encryption is and how good their hacking tools are and so on. But mass surveillance, you gather all of that data and you put it in archives such as the giant NSA data center in Bluffdale, Utah, south of Salt Lake City, where the NSA has a massive data center. And that allows for certain types of automated surveillance, right? If somebody types how to make a bomb, that can flag certain algorithms that were running within those data storage facilities on those servers. Ed Snowden was warning about this type of thing. He was warning about how if the surveillance state targets you, then they can go back and look at all your emails, all your text messages, phone calls, voicemails, all your posts on social media, and they can assemble that into a dossier and really deep dive into what's going on with you. Spying, so that's mass surveillance. Spying is something different. Spying is targeted data gathering on specific individuals or groups in order to develop patterns of behavior, to learn unexpected things about what they're doing, the connections and the relationships that they have, and so on. And spying has been a human endeavor for all of human history, right? The FBI and all kinds of agents of repression have used spying for a long time, but it's been human scale spying. In other words, if they want to target Justin because they think he's an eco-radical, then they've had to task human people to monitor his communications, to monitor his movements. They'll use the tools of mass surveillance for that. But it had to be filtered through a human being to really analyze the data, look for patterns, try and figure out what he was doing, try and assess what the threat risk is, and so on. And human involvement means that there's a limitation on how far that can scale, right? That's mass surveillance with targeted spying. We're in an era now with AI where mass spying is possible because of the amount of data that exists in our digitally connected world, where your cell phone is pinging a cell tower, every second, gathering location information, and that information goes to your network provider, and they share that information with the FBI, with police, with NSA, with anyone in the government who asks. Private corporations can also buy location data from cell phone companies. They can just buy it on the open market. So Verizon and T-Mobile and AT&T and all these companies are taking information about where you go all day, every day, where you spend your time, the places you go to, and they're packaging that information and selling it to the highest bidder, to anyone who will buy it. That's not even getting into, Ring cameras and other doorbell cameras, Internet of Things devices that people have in their houses, stuff like Siri and Alexa and these voice assistants, where now people have devices in their home that are listening all the time to what you say and are storing and using that information. They can tap into things like the TikTok algorithm, the Facebook algorithm, the Instagram algorithm, which is literally hacking your brain to try to figure out your motivation patterns. What will give you dopamine? What will keep you watching and viewing? This is a psychological profiling tool, essentially. All this data is available to mass surveillance companies, spying companies like Palantir, as well as to government repression agencies around the world like FBI and NSA. And they can use that now through AI for mass spying. So the human analyst isn't as important anymore. They can they can task an AI agent and they can say, okay, follow Justin McAfee. Tell us, we want you to track who he talks to, where he goes, what he writes, the things that he buys, the things that he reads, the things that he watches, and develop a threat model about his likelihood of engaging in some sort of illegal action, and develop a network analysis graph that we can use to determine who his most important relationships are to, and the likelihood of those people to participate in illegal actions. And all this can be done with essentially almost zero human interaction. That's mass spying. That's the world that we live in now with AI. And it's absolutely terrifying. These are capabilities that, the Gestapo in Germany or the Stasi in Soviet Russia never even dreamed of. The McCarthy era Red Scare U.S. government FBI, the Pinkertons, they never even dreamed of this type of capability. And we need to understand this both in order to mitigate against it, to counter it as best we can, and to be aware of what we're facing, right? This is why the Snowden leaks were so important when they happened, because we didn't even know what we were facing. Today, this type of capability is pretty much out in the open. I mean, Palantir advertises that they're doing this. They're proud of it. They're not trying to hide it anymore. So we can talk about how resistance needs to adapt and evolve to overcome this. But Justin, do you want to expand on this or chime in at all? And again, folks, this is a Q&A episode, so please ask questions, drop comments in the chat, and we'll try and get to this.
Yep, someone in the chat mentioned weather app. Every time you open your weather app, it's getting your location information and then it's selling it to companies. One thing, I saw a video posted on Substack here by a friend, and I commented on it. It was about there's kind of a movement in younger circles. It's like an analog movement, and the reason is like new cars, for example, are listening to you now. New cars can be shut off remotely. Like if you have a new Subaru, someone can remotely, the government presumably, if they had a warrant or whatever, could just shut off your car if they needed to. Um, so, and like you said, our communication devices, are tracked and all that. And so this analog movement is looking at like buying older cars, because older cars can be fixed. They actually design cars now to where you're not able to repair them. You have to take it to the dealership. They're so complex that you have to be like an engineer to work on them, and they're extremely expensive anyway. So some people are saying like, if I buy a $2,000 hoopty or some old car, it can be fixed easily. Which you just need to buy parts. You can learn how to do the repairs, and they don't have computers and listening devices, and they can't be shut down remotely. And not that it's likely, but there some of them, if they're old enough, wouldn't be impacted by an EMP pulse. So, but it's an interesting idea, because, and I wrote an article about using radios for communication. The example I gave was, this is right around the time of the fires that were in Los Angeles, right in the city. You had this fire raging, and cell phone towers were knocked out pretty quickly. And so even from just like a emergency situation standpoint, radios, you don't need antennas. I mean, you don't need towers. Antennas can boost your distance, for sure, and there's things like that. But you can put those up yourselves, and you can communicate with radios, and they can be intercepted to some degree. In World War II, there was this thing called the Enigma machine, and that was like one of the first encryption devices for radio. So what's interesting is that I doubt the government is is hacking people's radio communication as much these days. Like, they're not even thinking about, because analog. So just from a perspective of, if we're talking about security culture or whatever, if you wanted to avoid having this surveillance and spy state impact you, then learn older analog technologies that they probably aren't even monitoring or care about anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even going so much further back than the digital communication era, resistance movements always use analog communications and low-tech communications as the biggest way. I mean, you can go back to resistance movements in World War II and before, and people are using like dead drop techniques to communicate. They're using one-time pad codes. They're using, book codes and these different types of sort of analog cryptography. They're using messengers, people carrying messages on a bike or a motorcycle or on foot. And we've actually seen, in terms of other people who are not with the same motivation as me, but are also facing up against the U.S. empire, the Iranians, when faced by the hacking capabilities of the United States government, the Israelis, their response has been to use hardwired landlines buried underground to communicate between their different facilities around Iran, because you can't hack a landline. It's impossible. You either can cut the wire and there's no communication, or that's it, or it works. They're using messages delivered by people on motorcycles or on foot, because if the person gets through, the message gets through. You can't hack an old style motorbike that has no computer, that has no internet connection, that has no cell tower connectivity. The human mind and our ingenuity, the physical world, is our refuge against these surveillance tools, these AI mass spying tools. And I think that I don't know if I'm right on this. I'd be interested in your thoughts. You can tap a landline, Josh, absolutely. But what I'm talking about is, Iran has set up their own independent landline networks that aren't connected to other networks, right? So if the US and Israel don't have any way to physically tap into those networks, and they're not connected to any sort of wireless or internet network, then they can't interrupt it except by cutting the line. Thanks for that, though. But yeah, please, more questions, comments, welcome. I'm curious as to your thought on this, Justin, but cities are becoming increasingly militarized and surveilled. You look at places like London or New York City, or really any city these days, and the amount of cameras and surveillance that is present throughout even the neighborhoods, let alone like the business districts or industrial districts. And it's pretty shocking. I think resistance is going to become increasingly difficult in urban areas. And it would be interesting to dialogue on this topic with like some of the folks who were behind the urban guerrilla movements in the 60s and 70s, which were really like the George Jackson Brigade in Seattle, for example, who were really engaging in militant revolutionary action in urban settings, seeing themselves as sort of an insurgent force embedded within an occupying empire. Because there wasn't mass surveillance and mass spying wasn't taking place at that time. But I would be interested with where technology and state repression is at today, what they would say. I think that resistance needs to go increasingly rural to be effective in these times. It's not a forever answer, but I think if you want to find areas that are not heavily surveilled, then you need to go to more remote areas. And cities are work camps for capitalism essentially these days. There are great things about cities as cultural places, and in terms of connection with other people and so on. But most cities are increasingly militarized and surveilled, and that makes resistance quite difficult in those places, I think. And I think we're seeing this with our movements. We're seeing it with, for example, people fighting ICE data centers. Or ICE detention centers and detentions throughout the U.S. I'm very supportive and sympathetic with those movements. I've been going down to some of the protests here at the federal building. But we need to understand that in an asymmetric conflict situation where they have vastly more firepower, resources, surveillance technology, et cetera, than we do, when we go and protest and fight them at a federal building or at an ICE detention center, we are like peasants storming the walls of the castle. Like, we're going to their strongest locations and trying to fight them there. Rather than choosing the time and place of the conflict on our terms, we're letting them choose the exact terms of that fight. And again, that's not to say it's worthless. but I do question the strategic logic behind it in some ways, because I think that if we really want to, as a symbolic measure in terms of major public protests and gatherings, um, to show opposition, sure. But if you're actually talking about interdicting and stopping these efforts to deport and in many cases kill immigrants to the U.S., then I don't think going to the strong point of the opponent and somehow, engaging in conflict with them there is the best way to go about it.
What do you think about the alerting people that they're coming by having whistles and stuff like that
Yeah, I think
as a
that's
strategy?
it's a more decentralized strategy, and in Minneapolis, people's resistance to ICE became so effective using the methods of following them around, having these neighborhood signal groups and different information groups where people were saying ICE is here now, they're here, they're going this direction, show up here, block this street. People were able to make their jobs so difficult that ICE actually modified their tactics significantly. They started moving in much, I believe, I don't know if it was smaller groups. They changed their group size and they started using a lot more surprise rather than sort of roaming the streets and looking for people or like going about their raids in sort of obvious um, and straightforward ways.
As a
They
show.
sort of adopted a more asymmetric approach in a way. They started using more stealth and so on in response to that. So that's kind of an interesting counter example, but I think an example of people's effectiveness too. But But yeah, I think in terms of ecological resistance, I do think that we need to think like an asymmetric resistance movement or insurgency that's fighting against an occupying force. And when that's the situation, you don't go to their strong points and fight them there. You don't go into the meetings that they control everything and fight them there. You fight them on the fringes, in the mountains, in the forests, in the hills, in the deserts, in the places where their force is weak and you can concentrate your force with the element of surprise to achieve victories. And that's sort of easy to say in theory. It's more difficult to implement. But I'm reading a book right now that's about resistance movements during World War II, and it's like this is a blueprint for where we're at now. People still want to believe that we live in this functioning democracy, that with civic engagement we can be moving in positive directions, and we can all hope people can own a home and participate in normal life and so on. That time is over. We're living in a polycrisis. The climate crisis is spiraling out of control. We're living in a fascist state, and it's been moving deeper and deeper in that direction for a long time, but it's not a new thing. It's been a fascist state since the founding of this country. And people like me, white male living in the United States, have been able to many people like me have been able to ignore that because of the privilege that comes with our position, just like Afrikaners in South Africa could ignore apartheid and say, everything's fine. It's working. Let's just keep going forward. At the same time, whereas the ANC was bombing police stations, bombing oil refineries and transmission lines, recognizing that it's a life and death struggle because people are being massacred on the streets. I truly believe that is the extremity of the situation that we're in right now. It's a crisis. We are in a crisis, and yet people are still reacting as if this is like a democracy playground thing that they were taught about in kindergarten when they watched Schoolhouse Rock or something. I got to get some water.
It is, South Africa is a great metaphor analogy. Rather than it being an apartheid of color, it's more like an apartheid of capitalist oligarchs and the rest of us. They really have. I mean, there is the appearance of democracy. There's voting. There is a Supreme Court, and it's funny because Germany had many of those things in the 1930s as well, and so it just goes to show that when the right people are in those positions, like they have been here in the United States, they can completely, maybe in a more subtle way here in the United States, but they could completely take over um, a system and make the Democratic part really just a dog and pony show. Because we all know, like, no matter who you vote for, um, it's the campaign donors and the lobbyists of these capitalist oligarchs that really determine what laws are passed. Um, they determine what laws are enforced, and, what wars we go into. The opinion, like the Iran war, is one of the most unpopular wars ever. Um, I've written about this. I've written some articles about all the different ways that the democratic system is a farce. But I think back to the point is you do have to look at it like South Africa. Like, we're living in an apartheid state. We're occupied by these capitalist oligarchs. They've occupied us. There's not enough. There's not enough of people here that realize that, though. That's one of the differences, and that's one of the things that makes it a little more tricky. If it was Ireland in the 10s or 20s, you had an obvious occupier, and you had basically even the people who disagreed with each other all knew that they were occupied and would work together. Here, it's not so much that way. You're not.
Yeah.
Although more and more, you start to see people, even on the right and on the left,
Yeah.
realizing that we're ran by an oligarchy. I mean, there's a lot of people
Yeah.
on the right that I've been seeing who say everything that we've been told is a lie. Everything, and they don't like Donald Trump anymore. It's not everyone. There's still a lot of people who are Democrats and Republicans, but I think those. I mean,
Yeah.
like in Nevada, for example, I'm sure it's becoming true elsewhere.
Mhm.
The people who are registered to vote that aren't a Democrat or Republican are outnumbering
Mhm.
the other two,
Mhm.
the Democrats and the Republicans. They're just registered as either nonpartisan or some other party. So I don't know if
Yeah.
that makes any difference or if it's just sign that people are starting to see, but I think
Yeah,
that's
and
part of the difficulty.
I think part of the difficulty too is even the poor in the United States, for the most part, like working poor, I'm not talking about, people who are really destitute, but even the working poor in the United States are quite wealthy by global standards,
Mhm.
you know? And it's not to say that there's not problems with poverty and, the predatory effects of capitalism on poor and working poor people in this country. That's very real. But, Lewis Mumford talked about the magnificent bribe, which was that, you know, industrial capitalism is going to destroy the entire planet. It's going to plunder poor nations around the world. It's going to colonize and fuck over, the global South. Um, but in so doing, it's going to provide some really good gadgets and a good quality of life for people in the global North. And that's the magnificent bribe, essentially. And, frankly, I don't think more people do real resistance because we are spoiled. We are lazy. We are cowards. And we don't want to deal with the consequences of those actions because real resistance has real consequences. It's not something that you can just do online. It's not something that you can just do and go back to your nice house and enjoy your time with your family and, and have a great time with friends and have a normal life. Real resistance has serious consequences. And I feel like, I feel very much like I'm a person on the fringes of that real resistance, just the fringes of it in the work that I've done. People say, "Oh, Max," and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here. I'm trying to be real. People come to me and they're like, "Oh, Max, thank you so much for the sacrifices you made at places like Thacker Pass and the different direct actions and stuff you've been involved in." And, and I've faced real consequences for that. Like, I've been sued by the mining company. I'm being fined 50 grand by the federal government. I've, been threatened with physical violence multiple times, incredible ways. I've spent time like alone at resistance camps and on the front lines, like shaking in fear because I think that somebody's going to come hurt me or kill me, or that the FBI is going to come grab me, or, what have you. I've like almost destroyed many of the most important relationships in my life because of the sacrifices I've made to do just the stuff that I've done. But even what I've done is like still just the edges, I think, of what's needed. It's just the beginning of what's needed. I think about somebody like Assata Shakur, who was part of the Black Panthers and the Black Liberation Army. And she was imprisoned for her militant revolutionary resistance, and she escaped from prison, fled to Cuba, and she lived the rest of her life in Cuba in freedom. Solidarity to the Cuban people right now for what they're going through. It's fucking brutal. But
I've been hearing about some stuff they're doing there too.
Yeah, they're working. But one of the things that Assata said was, she was like, I don't want to be a militant revolutionary. She was like, I'd love to be a potter or an artist or a gardener. Like, this is what I really would like to do with my life. But she said, we live in a time of war, and I can't just sit on the sidelines of this. I'm not content to do that. And that's the sacrifice she made. She made the sacrifice to the point of taking up arms to fight for the future, to fight for revolutionary transformation of our society. And she was sent to prison for, I don't know how long, decades or life. And she fought her way out. She fought her way out. And she escaped overseas, never to see many of her loved ones ever again for her whole life. And many other people alongside her in the movement, like Fred Hampton, for example, they lost their lives. They died. They were killed fighting for what's right. So, to answer Brooks asking a question here that's sort of, it's a similar question you asked the other night on the Blue Earth Defense event. Thanks for re-asking it. She says, as a resistance tactic, what do you think about making parallel local systems, i.e. make their systems irrelevant by creating food sovereignty, local economies, etc.? I think this is important, but I don't think it's resistance. I think it's resilience work. Because I think that you can define resistance by the consequences. And I don't think this type of work, food sovereignty, local economies, etc., I don't think there are really big negative consequences for it. And that's why I would not define it as resistance. I think resistance is the stuff that has consequences. Resistance is when you're stopping an activity that you don't want to have happen anymore. Ulrike Meinhof, speaking of sort of urban guerrillas, said something like, protest is when I say that I do not like something. Resistance is when I see to it that thing stops happening. And
resilience makes resistance possible.
Yeah, I think resilience is important work too. I don't mean to denigrate it. I've got a whole table full of onions in there that I grew in my garden, this year as I'm preparing for trying to learn better skills in that arena and preparing for the 2027 El Nino climate catastrophe clusterfuck. But I wouldn't kid myself that that's resistance, personally. I would say it's resilience work. And again, I think it's important, but I choose to focus on resistance because I think we need resistance. I think we need it badly. And I think that resilience work is very important. It's also much easier. And so there are a lot more people doing it, a lot more. You look at everyone who's involved in permaculture, in local organic agriculture, farmers markets, CSAs, the transition town movement, rewilding, bioregionalism, all these types of things around the world. There are millions upon millions upon millions of people who are doing that work. And it's good and it's important, and I'm doing it too. But I choose to focus on the resistance stuff because I think that that's where, if folks read the post that I wrote a while ago about the 3 different types of action, shaping, sustaining, and decisive, shaping actions create the conditions for future victory. So a shaping action might be the creation of parallel local systems for food sovereignty, local economies. It might be training, recruiting people, education, culture change, spreading strategies, that type of thing. Sustaining work is how do you maintain the movement over time? That's fundraising, logistics. That's, in some cases like eco villages and communities that make it possible to sustain movements over time. In a resistance movement context, that includes things like, supplies and security and so on, the infrastructure to support the resistance. But then the decisive action is what all of those other things are meant to support. The decisive action is what actually achieves the goal. And for me, the goal is stop industrial capitalism or industrial civilization, however you want to define it. Stop industrial civilization, stop industrial capitalism, specifically by preventing it from doing the things that it is doing to destroy our planet. That means shutting down the fossil fuel economy, shutting down global trade, shutting down the global financial system, uh, shutting down all the industrial systems that are eating their way through our planet rapidly. And I think that can only be achieved ultimately by decisive action. I don't think people are going to en masse sort of turn away from the industrial system through resilience activities and make the industrial system collapse in that way. People have been working on that type of strategy for like 75 years or more, and the industrial system is arguably stronger than it's ever been in some ways. It's certainly larger than it's ever been. So I just don't think that that's ever going to work. So I don't think that resilience work is ever going to be decisive when it comes to confronting industrial capitalism
Alone,
and
like
stopping it from
if it's done
doing
alone.
what it does. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I agree, Brooke. They do need to be fed and housed, absolutely. Whether it's underground railroads in the movement for abolition to free the slaves, or underground railroads that people are doing right now for undocumented immigrants, or whether it's underground railroads, in coming years for resistance fighters and organizers um, who are sabotaging or confronting this dominant system in different ways. I think absolutely we need support systems to help with all that.
A lot of times when those systems do start to threaten, you start to create an alternative food system, so they start to threaten the dominant food supply system, and they get outlawed.
Mhm.
There's various ways they've done that in the past. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that with the state supporting the global system, they're gonna go to war with an alternative system if it grows to a point. But I do think there is an intersection between resistance and resilience work, of course. Like in the Irish example, they have people. That's one of the reasons I think they were successful. They were, as you were mentioning, Max. There were a lot of stuff they did was rural, and they had food availability, and they could survive hiding out away from the cities and not rely on the
Yeah,
British systems of food. And so then they were
yeah,
able to fight. So yeah, that's definitely a crossover there. And
yeah,
I did, unless you have something else you wanted to add, I did want to sort of ask a related question. You were talking about this lady. I don't remember her name, but she went to prison, then wound up in Cuba.
Rosada.
Um, yeah, it's interesting that when do people decide to really, this is kind of to the core of the question of why isn't there, we're at war, certainly the industrial system is at war with the planet and with us. Why isn't anyone doing those kinds of things? Do you think there's like a threshold? I just reposted this story about Madeline Riffaut, if that's how you say it. She shot a Nazi officer in Paris on a bridge in broad daylight, but the SS had destroyed a village that she knew from childhood. They killed 640 people, and so if you have people like the SS killing 640 people in a village, uh, their resistance movement. They issued an order for every person in the resistance. Every person in the resistance should kill one Nazi officer, one German officer, and do it in broad daylight. And yeah, so what the question is, like, not that that's a parallel here. We don't have soldiers walking around the streets. occupying the streets like in Paris in 1944. But we do have systems that are destroying the planet. And but at what point do people are humans equipped well to put their lives at risk when you don't have that 640 people killed in a village that you grew up
Yeah.
in? You know what I mean?
Well, I think we're getting there, and I think more and more people will. I
Right.
mean, look at what's happening in France and Spain right now with the wildfires. Wildfires are natural. I don't know these fires particularly, but I do know that the intensity and scale of fires is increasing with global warming. I don't know if these fires are particularly driven by that. But these radicalizing events are happening more and more, and they're killing thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, and they're going to be killing millions of people and more in the future. I was just reading last night, like I said, on Professor Elliot Jacobson's latest piece, that the last time there was an El Nino, the last strongest El Nino in the late 1800s that hit, 44 million people starved to death in the world. And this El Nino that's happening right now, that's going to be strengthening and really hitting in 2027, is going to be far, far stronger than the one that hit in the 1880s, I believe. There are
That was
also
food related.
huh?
That was food related.
Food related, yeah. There are also probably more than 8 times as many people on the planet as there were in the 1880s.
Mm.
So I don't know, but we could be seeing tens of millions of people dying due to global warming next year. The thing is, we're already facing a reality where 40% of all human deaths are caused in one way or another by air, water, and soil pollution, according to a Cornell study, which I can provide the citation for anyone who wants it. 40% of all human deaths from pollution. Those people are just as dead as if they got sent into a gas chamber or a Nazi officer put a gun to their head and pulled the trigger. Like, we're living through a genocide, an ecological genocide of human beings, not to even mention the ecocide of the natural world and non-human life, that makes the Holocaust look like nothing. We're already living through that. Eli wants the source. Would somebody mind just searching for Cornell 40% of human deaths due to pollution and putting that link in the comments for Eli? It should be easy to find. Thank you.
And everyone always says,
or email me, Eli.
Mao was Chairman Mao was the biggest mass murderer in history because of his economic plan that starved 40 million people, and 25 other million people who complained about it, I think, were just killed. And so that's an interesting thing that, we see people are perfectly willing to say that about Mao, but the potential for starvation and other deaths related to climate change is enormous, and no one's batting an eye. Yeah, that's
yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing is, people who tell the truth about this are generally ostracized. Thanks, John, for that link. I don't recognize that URL, but I assume it's the same one if it's the Cornell study. People who do this are people who tell the truth about these things are ostracized. Like, this isn't considered polite conversation. Most people, if you bring this up, when you're having dinner with some friends or something, they'll just look at you like you just farted really loudly or something, right? I mean, it's considered rude to talk about the reality of what's happening. And in some ways, this may be due to, during the Third Reich, a lot of everyday Germans knew more or less what was happening. A lot of them didn't, but some knew what was happening. If you lived near one of the however many concentration camps, there were 30, I think, something like that. If you lived near one of those concentration camps, the stench of burning bodies was like impossible to ignore. A lot of people knew what was happening, and yet a lot of people ignored it. They just went on with their everyday lives. And then when it came to Nuremberg, the trials of, a lot of the Nazi regime, many of the Nazi officials made the arguments that, I was just following orders. I did what I had to do because if I didn't follow orders, then I would have lost my job. I might have been sent to a concentration camp myself. I might have been killed. And the Nuremberg trials did not accept that argument. They sentenced many people to death for their role in Holocaust, in genocide, in war crimes, despite the fact that they were just following orders, despite the fact that they were just doing what they had to do to keep getting their paycheck, to keep going home to their families and so on. That's not an excuse in these times. It's not an excuse. And yet we all still use it as an excuse, and this gets back to the cowardice thing. Like, I just think that we here in the global north, I live in the US, so this is my experience. Here in the global north, we are cowards when it comes to these things. Few of us are really willing to sacrifice and do what needs to be done. And if you feel like I'm trying to pressure you, listeners, to not be a coward, you're exactly right. I am. I'm trying to pressure you to not be a coward, and me to not be a coward, and Justin, and everyone who's going to watch this. We can't be cowards anymore. We have to face the reality that fighting back against these things means serious repercussions, serious consequences, and we have to do it anyway. That's what courage is. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is doing something despite feeling fear, despite knowing what you might face for doing it. And I think that's what our movement really, really needs more of. We need courage. We need people willing to make sacrifices and do big things, do dramatic things in order to change the situation. I mean, look at the fight against slavery. Look at John Brown. John Brown and his sons went to Kansas, and they got swords and they got guns and they started killing slaveholders. They were committing straight up murders. And then they went to Harper's Ferry and they launched their attack on Harper's Ferry, and then they were captured and they were put to death. And they did this because they saw the need for action. They saw the need for someone to shake up the situation. It was stagnant. It was settling into this political deadlock where the pro-slavery forces and the abolitionary forces were just kind of grinding against one another. And they were recognizing the need to be the spark that would ignite the fire of change. And I really think that that's the time that we're in now. We're in that sort of pre-revolutionary moment where the fire's ready to burn, but we need people to be the spark to set off that fire. And I don't know what that looks like. The wrong thing at the wrong place can be a bad idea. It can backfire. It can lead to more repression. It can push things in the wrong direction. Certainly, there are mistakes and pitfalls out there. But I think that we have too long been caught in this attitude of waiting for something to change, waiting for the circumstances to change, waiting for somebody else to take the lead, for somebody else to take action, waiting for, whether you're waiting for the collapse or you're waiting for Jesus to come back down to earth or whatever you're waiting for. We've all been waiting. And I think we need to stop waiting. I think we need to make it happen. I think we need to make things happen. Sorry, I'm getting all fired up, Justin, because it happens to me. I just feel like we are so complacent. We are so complacent. We are so complacent. Folks, keep the questions and comments coming. This was meant to be a conversation about AI and data centers. It's evolved as these things tend to do. But I've got some more questions that folks sent in earlier, and I've got some more points I want to address. I'll just plug once again, if you're near Eugene, August 2nd, I'm hosting a gathering at an old growth forest threatened with logging down here. and I'm inviting folks to join me. So if you're in the area, get in touch. Check out my latest post for that. Thanks, Eli. Appreciate it.
I just wanted to mention one thing too, real quick, Max. If you look at the limits to growth scenario, the business as usual too,
Mhm.
because we were just talking about the last El Nino, the super El Nino in the 1880s. Lots of people starved. 40 million people, you said?
Yeah, 44, I
Well,
think.
uh, 44, and we're entering the same sort of scenario. Um, it's it's probably due to a lot of different factors, but that's scenario, that business as usual too scenario, shows that the world food supply starts to tank right around right now in the timeline, and that's
Yeah,
the scenario that we're most closely aligned with. So
yeah,
it seems plausible if that model is accurate, which they did a 50-year follow up in 2022,
mhm,
where they found that scenario matched up to the empirical data.
yeah,
So what's happening in reality was matching the model. So
yeah,
that same model, like I said, that has that food shortage. The world food supply just starts to tank right about right now. So
yeah.
it's the timing is probably here for a lot of reasons, and it's just going to escalate. So I mean, I think it's the time to escalate things to
Yeah.
build a strong resistance movement. The timing is right. Now's the time.
I've talked about this before, but Kim Stanley Robinson's a science fiction author, and he wrote a book called The Ministry for the Future, and it's a climate fiction book. And it starts in the very near future, say it's 2030 or something, I don't remember exactly, 2027, 2028. And a big heat wave hits India, and the power gets knocked out, the grid goes down, and the wet bulb temperatures exceeded. And wet bulb temperature refers to the temperature at which people can no longer cool themselves, because the combination of heat and humidity means that sweating no longer works. And so without external cooling sources, without the ability to just travel out of that area or have air conditioning or something to artificially lower your temperature, people just start to die. And it starts with the weakest people. It starts with the elderly. It starts with the very young. It starts with the sick. It starts with people who have disabilities or difficulty moving their bodies or other health issues, and they die. And then the younger people start dying, and the healthier people start dying. And in this scene in the book, it's fiction. Something, I forget the number, but something like 60,000 people die from heat over just a few days. The recent heat wave that hit Europe killed, 3,000, 4,000 people?
Not sure.
It's like 110 degrees across basically the entire Middle East right now. The only reason everyone who's there can survive at all, the tens of millions of people who live there, is because of air conditioning. That's increasingly the case across large parts of the world. I mean, here where I live, where the usual summer average high temperatures are like 80 degrees, it hit 116 a couple years ago in a big heat wave. 116. That was like, it exceeded the previous record high by like 12 degrees or something. Like, this is going to become increasingly common, and a lot of people are going to die. A lot of people are going to die, and a lot of crops are going to die. And that means that there's going to be a lot of starvation, and a lot more people are going to die. And there are going to be a lot more refugees and a lot fewer resources, whether it's water or oil or anything else. And there's going to be conflict over those resources, and a lot more people are going to die. There are many serious scientists who believe that by the year 2100, between 2 and 4 billion people will die due to global warming, essentially.
That's the limits to growth has the population going back down to 1900s levels.
Yeah.
Which is I think, was it 2 billion at that point, or was it more?
I'm not sure
So
off the top of my
let's
head.
see.
But I mean, this is what is happening. You know, if you are
Yeah.
in Pakistan, if you're in the Mariana Islands, if you're in the Philippines, if you're in many different places around the world, this is already hitting. It's not a future situation. It's future for those of us who can afford AC and have reliable grids and have food in the grocery stores and a paycheck. It's happening now. And in the book, what happens as a result of this massive heat wave and these 40,000 people dying, or however many it is an underground resistance movement forms that's called the Children of Kali. Kali's the goddess of destruction and war, also rebirth and regeneration, I believe, in the Hindu tradition. I'm not an expert on Hinduism, so I apologize if I'm offending anyone or not saying that correctly. But they call themselves the Children of Kali. And they are completely underground, completely anonymous. They have no public, they have no social media. They don't bother with writing articles or making videos or doing live streams like this. Instead, what they do is they start taking action to stop the flow of fossil fuels with the knowledge that those 60,000 people, their relatives, friends, family members, children, parents, are dead because of climate change. And millions and billions of more will die soon if it is not stopped. They start taking action without waiting for permission, without going through established channels. And what they do is described in the book. They start bombing petrochemical facilities and oil refineries and pipelines. They use drones. They use explosives. They use different types of sabotage. I believe in the book, they assassinate oil company executives. They say that, if you're an oil company executive, you are presiding over the killing of billions of people. And if you choose to take that job, then you have forfeited your right to life. And we're going to take your life. I recognize that that's a very serious thing. And most people in the environmental movement in this country and around the world would say that's crazy to do something like that. I don't think it's crazy at all. Personally, I don't think it's crazy at all. I think it's a recognition of the extremity of the situation we're in. And the third thing that I remember that they do is on one coordinated day all around the world, they use rocket-propelled grenades or shoulder-fired missiles or something like that. And they blow up something like 500 airplanes as they're taking off from airports around the world on the same day at the same time. And they call that Plane Day, I believe. And they kill a lot of people in doing this. And their point is, flying is done. Done. No one can fly ever again. Too polluting, too much carbon emissions, can't happen anymore. And there are various people now in the real world. This is all from the book, right? There are various people now in the real world who are fighting against flying, who are personally abstaining from flying, who are personally encouraging others to not fly, who are working to stop airport expansions, combating, private flights, and so on. And aviation is at an all-time high and is increasing. It's not working. And this is the problem with personal change approaches to these massive global problems, is that they don't work. They're not working. That's not saying don't change your personal behavior. Absolutely encourage people to change their personal behavior. But in terms of bringing about political change, it just doesn't work. It never has. And so in the book, that's what the Children of Kali do. They blow up a bunch of planes all on the same day, and they tell the world flying is done. It's over. It can't happen anymore. And Gary says, yeah, they end up using blimps in the book so that there's still some air transport available, but it's very slow and low carbon, etc. The Children of Kali are
I mean,
fascinating
to be fair,
yeah.
I think commercial general aviation accounts for 2 to 2.5% of global carbon emissions. So,
Mm.
I bring that up because a lot of people. I know you've flown before, right? I've flown. I don't really fly very often. I went to Scotland for my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, and someone gave me a bunch of shit for it. And I just like, um, you know, shutting down any kind of fossil fuel usage makes sense, and it may not
Mhm.
be some big percentage when you do it, but um, just to put it out there, like I don't believe in giving individual people, like a super hard time because they drive a fossil fuel car or
Yeah.
they use the internet and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I've flown quite I mean, compared to when you consider that 2 generations ago, basically 0 people on Earth had flown. Maybe it was a few thousand, right? 3 generations ago, 4 generations ago, 0 people had ever flown ever. I've in my life, I've been to the Philippines. I went to Russia with climate scientists. I've been into many places around the world. Um, and we can't be doing that in the future. So yeah, it's not a personal attack for me. I mean, I drive a car. I think it's also important to note that aviation is 2.5% of carbon emissions, but because those emissions are injected high in the stratosphere, they have a disproportionate effect on warming. Um,
Oh,
I think it's
I
like
didn't
something
know
like
that.
4 to 5% of warming um,
No.
because of aviation. And in terms of, you know, in terms of individual contributions to emissions, one flight across the ocean, one intercontinental flight could be basically like more than all your other emissions from everything else you do, driving, eating food, heating your house, cooling your house, and stuff like that. So people don't fly that often generally, so it's this low percentage overall. But um, in terms of,
My footprint.
yeah, how that footprint sort of integrates.
So
But the children of Kali in the book, they're not trying to punish individuals. They're not trying to say those people who are on those planes are bad people or sinners. They're making a political statement and a militant statement in a way. They're saying, as a society, we are done flying.
we're
It's
done with
over.
this.
Yeah. And
That makes sense.
and that is achieved through terrorism in the book. I mean, it's through terrorism that they're doing because people are after that afraid of flying and they don't want to fly because they're worried their plane's going to get blown out of the sky. Um, and they choose in the book to use that fear, to use that method of fear to achieve political change. Am I saying that that's the best method to do that? No, not necessarily. Um, I don't know what the best way is to stop people from flying. But I think that, for me, I would rather we cut off fuel supplies at the source rather than blow hundreds of planes out of the sky. That's why I've
Yeah.
advocated for
Yeah.
targeting pipelines, refineries, uh, petrochemical facilities, and so on, fuel depots
Choke
for a long
points.
time. Yeah, the electric grid, the
Like kind of like the
financial
Strait of
system.
Hormuz, right?
Yeah. And um, this is the thing. Like, we need to start thinking like a resistance movement. We need to start thinking like a resistance movement. We're too used to thinking as if we are political subjects operating in a functioning democracy who can use personal behavior change and communal organizing techniques and lawmaking and voting and public comments to change the way that things happen. And again, I do some of those things. I'm involved in them too. Like, I'm complicit in that too. So I'm reminding myself as much as I'm reminding all of you that those things aren't working. This one will blow your mind, Justin. I just found this out the other day. So if you go on various data sites, Our World in Data, which they're fucking terrible, but they have some good data sets anyway. They're
Is
very
that the
much
World
like,
Bank that does that one?
no, it's like big Bill Gates money behind it, and their whole motivation is like the world is bad, but it's getting a lot better, and it's better than it's ever been. And they have a whole approach and mindset that's all about progress and the power of technology and industrialism to solve future problems. And anyway, they're just technotopians like Bill Gates, basically. But they have some good data sets, and one of their data sets is energy use and energy mix over time. So how much energy were humans using in the year 1800? How much energy are humans using now? From all sources, whether it's just burning wood to cook food at home, or burning coal to power a factory, or windmills to wind turbines to power a data center, or gas in a car, or whatever it is, nuclear power. And so what I found out was that I think it was 1979 that Jimmy Carter held that address where he put on a sweater and asked people to drive slower and put solar panels on the White House in response to the oil crisis.
Right.
When Jimmy Carter did that address 50 years ago, the energy mix in the United States, or globally, the energy mix that humans were using was 80.6% fossil fuels. We were using far less energy overall, on the planet because population was way smaller. There was, much less industry, fewer cities that were much smaller, et cetera, right? Way less cars on the road, all that. 80.6% fossil fuels 50 years ago. The most recent energy analysis that came out from, I read about it on oilprice.com. It's, I believe they used to get put out by BP, but then BP transitioned it to like a nonprofit organization. It's called the Statistical Review of World Energy. It used to be put out by BP, and then the Energy Institute, this nonprofit organization, took it over, right? So it's kind of the authoritative global report on how much energy is being used, what types of energy, where, what the mix is. It's a very detailed, hundreds of pages report. The report for 2025, last year, says that fossil fuels make up 86% of the primary energy mix in 2025. So of all the energy used all around the planet by human beings last year, 86% of it was fossil fuel energy. So that means in 50 years since Jimmy Carter has been working on, since Jimmy Carter gave his address with the solar panels and asking people to change, the fossil fuel percentage of our power globally has gone up by 6%. And the amount of energy being used in total has skyrocketed. It's like more than doubled, right? That's just shocking to me.
Stop burning wood?
It's just shocking because it's not shocking to me because I've been researching this stuff for a long time, right? Yeah, so in 1979, the total global energy consumption was 88,000 terawatt hours. Doesn't really matter what that is, but it's a lot of energy. It was 88,000, right? Last year was something like 188 terawatt hours. So it's more than, our energy consumption is more than doubled, and we're using more fossil fuels. It's just fascinating to me because I included this in a presentation I gave the other day about greenwashing and renewable energy technologies and how they're not working. And, 50 years. People have been working on bringing solar energy and wind and renewables online for longer than that, more than 50 years. And things are worse. Renewables are even a smaller percentage than they were back then. It's just so ironic to me because you go on the website of Greenpeace or the NRDC or the Sierra Club or the Democratic Socialists of America or the Green Party or, all these progressive and lefty organizations and nonprofits and political groups and politicians, and they all talk about how renewable energy is the solution and it's going to push us in the right direction. It's going to help us solve the climate crisis. It's not working. It's not working, guys. It's not working at all. Everything's worse than it was 50 years ago, even from a percentage standpoint, let alone a full scale, like the absolute scope of the fossil fuels being burned. It just drives me nuts.
Plus, even if that was making progress, right? 7 of 9 planetary boundaries have been breached, and we're talking exclusively about one of them and
Yeah.
ignoring the others in the pursuit
Mhm.
of a solution that we haven't even made a dent in. In fact,
Yeah.
it's gotten worse.
Yeah. Well, should we take some more questions, Justin? Um, I don't know if folks who are watching have some questions or comments that they want to jump in. Maybe we should dive more into this, how resistance will can adapt and evolve to overcome AI surveillance and generally what we're facing today. Do you have any more thoughts on that, Justin? I mean, I try and talk about strategy and tactics and methods as much as I can. Um, one practice that I've just instituted in my life, which I encourage others to do as well, is just to introduce noise into the surveillance system. Um, both for as a sort of small scale monkey wrenching against surveillance, but also in order to preserve my own potential freedom of action in the future. And what I mean by that is I try and use every bit of security software and tool that I can. I don't have a phone call if it can be a signal call, and I don't have a signal call if it can be an in-person conversation. Um, I use Proton Mail for my emails. I have you know, encrypted. All my hard drives are encrypted. I use strong passwords on everything, like ridiculously strong. People make fun of me for the security procedures that I use for my things. And it's like, not like I have all this super sensitive data that I'm hiding, but I want to use those methods so that one, I know how to use them. Two, I'm not making my information easy to get because I don't know what's going to be useful to these fuckers who are doing this mass spying and mass surveillance. And three, because I want to encourage a security culture across our movements, right? We need to have security culture. And security culture is not just about use signal and you're fine. It's not just about, do a couple straightforward things and you're good to go. A security culture is a culture in which we collectively are trying to keep each other safe, to preserve our effectiveness and our ability to take action in light of what's happening with surveillance and repression. And so I just turn my phone off sometimes. I leave my phone behind sometimes. I take different routes when I travel at times. I make note of where there are cameras out and about. Joe's talking about the flock cameras in Pennsylvania. I try not to get on any cameras anytime. I wear a hat or I put on a mask. I might change up my clothing as practices, not necessarily because I have something to hide, but as practices to try to normalize this behavior and try to gain increased skills that I can then share with others. I have Faraday bags. If you don't know what that is, it's just like a bag that you can put a phone or a laptop or something like that in, and no radio signals can get in or out. So, um, if you wanted to bring your phone somewhere but not have it track your location or know where you were, then you could put in a Faraday bag. Of course, you even have to be careful with that because phones these days have accelerometers in them. So they might not have a GPS reading or a cell phone tower reading of where you are, but it can say, okay, the last time we had cell service, Max was at his house and then he went 400 yards to the north at this speed, or he went for this duration of time at this acceleration in this direction. Then he turned this direction. A compass will still work inside a Faraday bag. Then he accelerated for this long in this direction, and so on. So highly sophisticated spying measures could defeat even a Faraday bag, potentially, in theory at least. I don't know of this happening, actual cases of it. But again, learn these methods, learn these countermeasures, practice them, because that's how we have freedom to take action. Like people are sawing down flock cameras all over the country. Wherever they're popping up, people are just buying little, reciprocating saws or different types of angle grinders and things like that. And they'll just walk up with non-identifying clothes, and maybe they'll put rocks in their shoes so they walk weird, because gait analysis is a thing that these AI surveillance cameras can do now, or just by the way you walk, even if it can't see your face, they can identify people. I don't know of that being used in court yet, but it could certainly bring suspicion and attention to people. Um, so people might put rocks in their shoes to change how they walk, make themselves walk a little weird. And then people just cut down these cameras and they destroy them with a hammer. Or they spray them with spray paint. They do all kinds of things to them. They just steal them. Um, I encourage that. I think that's modern day Robin Hood behavior right there, which I encourage thoroughly. Um, Justin, do you want to add anything else? And then we got some more questions coming in. So if folks, again, add questions,
That
please.
that seems like a low risk entry point for people to start doing something. There's a lot of stuff you can learn from what the folks did in Hong Kong. Not that that's probably going to stop the Chinese government from, kind of becoming more authoritarian there as they kind of wheel out their systems there. But that's just a place, I think, learning from what other people are doing around the world, because people are getting pretty creative in places where they're having to face even more overt authoritarianism than we do here. Another, um, another, I mean, other than going like back to analog technology, like I was talking about, whether it's a vehicle, um, not having a cell phone that you carry with you all the time, or using radio to communicate, things like that. If you are using a phone, I like the idea of the Faraday bag, but there's also some apps. I was just hearing about one called the Glacier app. Uh, that company is like a security firm, and they provide security to like countries and big wealthy corporations and stuff like that. Uh, and apparently, that the services they provide to those people for security, so that they don't get hacked and spied on and things like that. It's quite expensive, but they have an app. Um, Someone came up with the idea, well, could you offer something that's affordable for regular people? The Glacier app, and it basically gives you a secure DNS. It blocks uh, web trackers and data collection. It uses a VPN that's um, in the United States. So if you're worried about other governments spying on you, because a lot of times people get a VPN and then it'll be in another country like China or something, and then they could get the information and then sell it to someone, including the United States government. So, and then also you can have burner numbers. So instead of having like a burner phone, which is another way to go, you could buy a burner phone and use that. Um, but with this Glacier app, you can have burner phone numbers essentially, so that you could use those phone numbers to call, contact people, and if the relationship went south or you just needed to cut them off or whatever, you could just throw away that phone number and get another number. So it allows you to basically call people from these numbers and not share your real number with people. So I think that's interesting. I would be interested to know what you think about a national strike, Max. Certainly, I just wanted to say if it could be organized, I think it could be super powerful. Like the Montgomery bus strike, right?
Yeah.
That was effective, but the key there is that critical mass of people that is required for it to happen. And so, if there's a critical mass, absolutely, it can be resistance. That's worked in places like where they have former Soviet republics and stuff. After the Soviet Union collapsed, there was some dictators that took over, and um, they use some techniques like mass strikes to bring down some of those dictators in those European countries. I know there's a documentary about that. I'll see if I can find it and post it, but that talks about some of the things that they did in that realm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, one thing is that most strikes these days aren't necessarily political strikes. They're about better working conditions for the workers, which, that I guess that's a political issue itself, but they're not like solidarity strikes. It's pretty rare to see labor actions that are based on broader solidarity these days. We saw that in Minneapolis again with the localized general strike there, which caused some of the major corporations in the area to start bringing some pressure against politicians to change the situation with ICE there. So certainly that was an effective use of that tool. Another example would be various longshore workers around the world, including in the port of Oakland, have done political strikes or refused to handle shipments bound for occupied Palestine. And that is part of a broader strategy that I think is very successful, or is very potentially successful, bringing economic pressure against the genocidal Israeli state, quote unquote, occupying entity. As far as in the United States, in terms of national strike, I see the value in it. The difficulty, again, that I perceive is that I think most people in the US are in a state of identifying with industrial capitalism to a greater or lesser extent. I think most people have acquiesced to the magnificent bribe that Mumford was talking about. And I'd love to be proven wrong by that. Absolutely would love it. And I may be. I would love to see some mass militant labor organizing in this country, but most unions these days are relatively politically tepid and pretty integrated into the capitalist system in one way or another. I'm glad they exist. My mom's been out on strike with nurses union, with SEIU, and my partner was in the teachers union, and I support unions, but we don't see much political vision from unions these days at all, especially when it comes to ecological issues. The major trade unions, for example, they are very pro-mining. They're very pro-fossil fuels. They're very pro-industrial logging, data center construction, because those projects mean lots of jobs. And that is one of the difficulties that ecological resistance always runs into, is that if you're willing to cut down your forest, you're going to have money. And if you're not willing to cut down your forest, you're not going to have money. And that means these corporations always have money and they can provide jobs, they can provide economic incentives, and so on. So I'm actually planning to try and organize a training through CELDIF coming up here with some radical labor organizers who I need to reach out to and connect with, and find some other ones. And I'm interviewing a woman in coming weeks from I think it's called the Working Class Climate Alliance or something like that, based in the UK. So I'll be interested to dive into these topics with her, because I think if you really take an internationalist position on labor solidarity, then the position that like trades unions have been in favor of mining here, in favor of the Thacker Pass mine, or in favor of EV production at union facilities in Michigan, General Motors union run facilities. Internationalism is totally destroyed in those circumstances, because those batteries are being built with cobalt that comes from slave labor mines in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or mines which might as well be. It's coming from nickel. There's nickel coming from nickel mines in Indonesia, which I mentioned earlier, which are, just research nickel mining in Indonesia. It's awful. And so if you have labor organizing at a level of consciousness that's simply saying, as long as we have good jobs, then that's all that's needed, then you're not getting anywhere. I think we need revolutionary labor organizing that says, no, we need to not just overthrow capitalism, but overthrow industrialism as a whole. Not just replace capitalism with an industrial socialism that from an environmental perspective looks largely the same. But we need to actually radically change the way we live. I think if we see that type of revolutionary unionism, then I'd be really interested in the impact of national strikes or even localized strikes coming from that perspective. But we're not really seeing that to this point. I'm sure there are labor organizers out there who are, more or less aligned with me, but most labor is very much in favor of industrialism, and that most labor unions, and that I think is a big problem. I don't know if anyone else has comments or questions in the chat related to that, but that's just the reality that I see right now.
Yeah, having like a singular movement cause is very difficult, right? Like in that movie, Bringing Down a Dictator, it's Milosevic is what that's about. How they took that, and they used nonviolent resistance, which is a tactic that can be used effectively if there is a unifying sort of motive, cause.
Yeah.
And for them, it was bringing down Milosevic. That was it. For Vietnam or for Ireland or whatever it might be, a lot of times that singular motivation or cause was getting rid of the occupier. The problem with having like an ecocentric anti-industrialism cause as your singular cause is that's probably, like you were saying earlier, a low number of people, and it's hard to use those kinds of nonviolent tactics without that kind of broad mass movement for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we may get to the point with the ongoing but accelerating collapse of ecology, of the climate, with the mass death that's coming from that, where radicalism will happen. But my worry is that with all the propaganda, decades of propaganda that's been poured into the solution to climate change is green industrialism. It's EVs, it's solar, it's wind. My fear, which I think is a very well-rooted fear, is that with the mass death, with the crisis, what we'll see is a massive upsurge in support for that green industrialism, rather than actually support for nature and a systemic transformation at a deeper level. Even though that won't work, even though the renewable energy approach won't solve the climate crisis, I think it's going to extend it out. I think it's going to be like the 10-pack a day smoker who gets on nicotine patches or something and is just slapping them all over their arms, and like they're extending the problem in a way. That's probably a bad metaphor, because I know reducing dosage is actually a good way to get out of addiction in times. But I mean, that's my worry. If we had serious and growing and more mainstream political movements that were talking about, okay, solar, wind, electric vehicles, these technologies have serious consequences, serious harms associated with them, but we see a place for them on a relatively small scale as a transitionary technology as we abandon fossil fuels rapidly and go through this crash relocalization of society that's going to be really fucking hard. And we're going to promote some of use of that technology on a small scale to facilitate that process being a little smoother and less shitty. Then that's a human, that's like a realistic conversation to me that we can have, at least. I don't know that I would agree with all of it. I don't know that I would support, sacrificing places like Bahima, Thacker Pass to make that transition smoother. Because I tend, my Substack's called Biocentric. I tend to align with nature on these questions. I might tend to say, you know what, fuck all the humans that are going to have a rough crash, including myself. we caused the fucking problem, deal with it. Like nature shouldn't have to pay more so that we can have a slightly easier ride as we come down off our own fucking sugar high of industrial destruction. But I know that I'm, maybe more of an extremist on that than most people are. I think it's at least an adult conversation that you could have at that point. But that conversation's not even being had. Like
Right.
maybe in some elements of the degrowth movement, partially, but so much of the degrowth movement even has bought into, a more technotopian vision of the future where they're like, everyone can have an eco-modern lifestyle along the lines of European low energy lifestyle if we just use solar and wind and get electric trains everywhere and so on. And I just roll my eyes because I think from an ecological perspective, A, that's utter destruction to huge amounts of ecology of the planet. And B, I just think it's kind of nonsense in the way that, like, when I talked with my friend Ashish Joshi about this, he's like, these people are talking about getting refrigerators to everyone who doesn't have one in the world right now when, like, those people they're going to be worried about like survival and having any food at all, now or in the very near future. Like this idea of bringing an eco-modern European lifestyle to people is like disconnected from the ecological reality of how bad things are and how bad they're going to be in the near future. Like these supply chains aren't going to work. And this idea of sort of creating a ecotopian vision through global coordination to provide high quality of life to everyone. He says it's just unrealistic, and I think that that's true. He did some big critiques of Jason Hickel, the degrowth scholar, along those lines. So, yeah, I don't know.
That's a tough obstacle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I see the comment. That's the problem. We're disconnected from nature, and that holds the industrial complex together. I completely agree. And thank you. I'm not an extremist. I'm a realist. Thanks for that comment. You're not an extremist. You're a realist. The mainstream green movement is living within the industrial bubble of nature alienation. I think it's true. I think it's really true. And it's easy to live in that bubble. If you've never been to somewhere where they're clear cutting a forest to put up, uh, you know, hundreds of acres of solar panels, it's easy to say, oh, sure, it's fine to put up solar panels. But when you actually go there and you actually see it with your own eyes, and you see, oh, this is no different than bulldozing and blowing up a mountaintop for coal in terms of its effect on nature. This is no different than mountaintop removal coal mining. Or you go to a lithium mine and you see what they're doing there. Or you go to a big wind turbine facility and you see the scale of these machines, which are just outrageously massive. And you realize like these things are like the Death Star from nature's perspective. These things are the Death Star. And yet people are like, oh, this is great. Let's just build like 10 million of these to provide a low level of energy for everybody. Um, so yeah, I think a lot of people are unfortunately out of touch on these issues. Jeannie says, I would cry uncontrollably if I saw a clear cut. Yeah, I've seen them, and I have cried uncontrollably. They're brutal.
How do you feel when you go and see that old growth tree that I think I saw you posted a picture of? When you go and see that, how do you feel?
Oh man. Awe, reverence, peace, serenity, calm, the ability to breathe very deeply and just the air, such high air quality. Just makes me want to lay down underneath it and take a nap.
It's special,
but also, sorry?
It's special. It really is.
Yeah.
You know?
But also this sense of fear and dread, knowing what's coming, knowing that, friends and allies in British Columbia have been fighting logging of old growth forests there for the past 6 years and have won in some cases, but in many cases they've lost. And, I've never seen, so I've seen old growth pinyon pines and juniper trees cut down that were hundreds of years old. maybe 700 years old in some cases. I've seen those cut down, and that was fucked up. Um, and those trees are pretty small. They're maybe, at most, uh, they're pretty. The pinion pines, I could, get my arms around almost. Um, the junipers have a pretty big base, but they don't grow that tall, maybe 30 feet, even the real old growth ones. I've never seen a fresh clear cut of old growth Western Oregon or Western, Cascadia rainforest um, in person. And that would be a hard thing to see because, this is my home ecosystem where I grew up. And I spent a lot of time in old growth forests around this area. And I've seen a lot of clear cuts of younger forests, which suck. Medium aged forests, trees 100, 140 years, that's awful. But to see, 500 plus year old trees getting clear cut like that would be pretty brutal. And so when I go up to those ancient trees here, I think about the potential of that, and that gets me pretty motivated.
I think that might be one of the, I mean, individually, when we think about those experiences of being in an old growth forest, you'd like to think if maybe, people had that connection, they would be more willing to fight back and do something.
Yeah.
Like one of the people said in the comments, people get disconnected from nature. And in the industrial system, that seems to be part of the design, make us looking at these phones more than we do trees. And then we're just disconnected from it.
Yep. Yeah, and this gets back to some questions that some folks ask. Greeley, Janet, Earthling, IB, in a while back in the biocentric chat, we were talking about disconnection from nature as being disconnection from reality. It's not. We talk about disconnection from nature almost like nature is like this luxury item to be consumed. And like if you're disconnected from it, it's bad. Like being disconnected from your inner self is bad or something, But being disconnected from nature is being disconnected from reality. And that's the world that we all live in. I posted something about this recently about, just asking people, how often do you touch plastic versus how often do you touch a wild grown plant or soil? How often do you interact with a screen versus how often do you interact with a wild creature? And how much time do you spend on those interactions relatively? And, I know for me, like I live in a pretty wild place. You can see around here, there's lots of nature around. People have seen me posting videos of bobcats and deer and wild turkeys and stuff. I have a lot of interactions with nature on a daily basis, hourly basis, pretty much living out here. And by choice for my sanity and for my connection. But even still, I spend far more time in relationship with screens because of the work I'm doing, because of trying to earn a paycheck than I do in relationship with the natural world. And that is a form of psychosis. There's a film that a friend made years ago called Stare Into the Lights, My Pretties, and it's all about screen culture and technology. And Stare Into the Lights, My Pretties, I think is a line from The Wizard of Oz, right? Something like that.
I've seen that. That's good.
Yeah, it's quite a film. It's free online if folks want to watch it. But that's the whole point, is that these technologies are a spell. We're under a spell, and we're losing track of reality because of that spell. And, I know it's true for me, despite all the safeguards I try and put in place, despite my time in nature, my intense efforts over decades to remain connected to reality as much as I can. Still, I have some of that. I've called it internet-induced psychosis before. I think it's a sign of our times. And that's why one of the pieces that I'm working on coming up here, it's a long-term project I've been working on, is simply called The Internet is Evil. and I'll be making that argument. But I don't know. We've been on for a long time, Justin. It's been 2 hours. Does anyone have any last questions or comments as we kind of wrap up? Or Justin, do you want to say anything as we kind of try and bring this to a close here?
Yeah, I'm glad it's good to have the talk because it's like you said, it's easy to be just absorbed by the artificial world. Uh, I think it's good to spend that time out there away from the artificial world just to get yourself motivated for what we need to do. And
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't have all the answers here, but it's good to talk about it. It's good to like put it kind of at the forefront of what we're thinking about because
Yeah.
if we're not thinking about that, we're thinking about other stuff. We should be thinking about resistance and about engaging in this fight for the natural world. Period. So
Yeah.
let's just keep doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. And I totally agree. I think, when I think about, like, for example, the fight at Thacker Pass, that came about because I spent several days in, meditation, journaling, outside, completely offline for days, camping, before I even went to Thacker Pass, reflecting, thinking. And as a result of that, I had sort of a dream vision, which I've written about before, about that place. And I went there and I camped out and I stayed off my screens and I had more dreams. And it's not the dreams necessarily that are the path, but like we're always looking for answers outside ourselves. We're always looking for somebody else to have the answer. And I think the answer is in that courage, in that determination to action, in that commitment. And I think that comes through um, through being in threatened places and being in relationship with threatened beings. Whether those are human communities or forests, grasslands, waters, rivers. Um, there's no excuses anymore, in those circumstances, and all of our internal dialogue about all the reasons not to do something kind of fall away in those situations. So, yeah.
Being out there in the desert in Nevada for 20 plus years, spending so much time out there, among those Joshua trees and those old growth yuccas, sometimes 300 or 400 years old, and then seeing them come and just grind them to dust for these solar panels. I mean, it was unreal and enraging, and it motivated me to do a lot of work. I mean, I just made films. I wasn't. I went to events and stuff. It felt sometimes you feel powerless, but in that process, I learned a lot about. I mean, I've just been ever since then. I've been studying resistance movements, trying to learn and figure out, what are we doing and how can we make a difference? Because granted, it does feel hopeless sometimes, but I think whatever happens, some of my best experiences have been just engaging in this. So I think it's worth, however you feel, don't give up. Just keep trying to find a way. And people have found ways to defeat uh, hegemons for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Yeah.
So, it's definitely a possibility to do. So
Yeah.
let's not give up.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching, joining us. Thanks, Justin, for taking the time to have this conversation.
Thank you.
I appreciate folks, chiming in with questions and comments. I definitely enjoy kind of a dialogue style of discussion is always my favorite. So hopefully in the future we can keep doing more of these sort of Q&A topics. If folks want to hop into the Biocentric chat and drop any questions or suggest topics to sort of theme around these future discussions, that's awesome. We welcome those. And I'll be seeing some of you on Sunday out in the Old Growth Grove. So I'll look forward to that. Thanks, everyone.
Max.
See you, Justin.
Yeah.